Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Women's Health Unwrapped. Thank you so much for choosing to listen to this episode today. I'm sure you're going to take a lot of value from the conversation we're about to have. We're talking about irregular patterns of working, particularly shift patterns, which we know many people work in. There's lots of different sectors, industries, types of jobs that women are doing, which require them to be outside of that typical 9 to 5 kind of schedule. So if your work hours and patterns are holding you back from eating healthier and getting into some of those healthier habits and routines that you perhaps want, then this conversation is certainly for you. Now, in the UK, it's said around 20% of the workforce is considered to be shift workers. So they're those people who are working on different patterns outside of that very constructed, regular 9 to 5 typical job, which we know isn't quite the typical and most normal type of working schedule for many of us right now. Many of the 8 or so million people who are working as shift workers are women. There's lots of industries like hospitality, travel, health, in the NHS. A lot of those workers are female, and many of them are working different shift patterns as well. And the number of women who are working shifts is rising. So I think this is a really meaningful and important conversation, and one that certainly links into midlife, menopause, and a time of change, which can be then exacerbated when we are outside of, a typical schedule that for many of us is still tricky to change and implement new habits in. So I'm joined by Anna Earl to dive into this today. Anna is an expert in nutrition and something she's going to talk about chrono-nutrition, all about our body clocks and how shift work is perhaps putting us under increased risk of a range of chronic health conditions. There's lots of bad press, shall we say, which can be quite scary when you're a shift worker. So we're going to dive into all of that and help you to understand what you can do to bring in some new habits and regulate your body clock, especially around nutrition. So welcome to the podcast, Anna.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. This is, as we chatted about a couple of weeks ago when we first met, this is a conversation and topic that I think is so relevant when, people aren't necessarily defining themselves as a shift worker, but perhaps on reflection, listening to us today, realise that their job isn't that very, typical mapped out schedule, day to day, week to week. And I think for many of us, even who are perhaps in a more 9 to 5 type of job, life is irregular, and that in itself can cause a lot of disruption to our body clocks, and certainly when it comes to food, the way we eat. So just to kick us off, I'd love to know from you what your most impactful healthy habit is that helps you to stay well at the moment.
So I think having understood one of the key principles of chrono-nutrition, so how we digest food on a 24-hour cycle, if you like, has been quite real changing for me. So even though I used to work shifts, but I don't anymore, but I still keep those principles in my mind when I think about food timing and food choices. Because what became as a bit of a revelation is that our digestive system actually goes to sleep at nighttime. So when it gets dark, we have the signals from the sun, similar to our wake-sleep cycle. And digestion works in very much the same way. We have that signal that it's starting to get dark, and the brain thinks, okay, I don't need to digest food anymore because it's bedtime. So it's time for the digestive system to have a complete rest as well. And even if I'm up all night and needing to fuel and needing energy, you can't really trick your body into working sort of contrary to that very strong signal from the sun, basically. There are certain ways with very bright lighting, but it's very difficult to to overturn that, certainly not permanently. And so just being very aware of the fact that as it gets dark, we can't digest food very well. We don't have the capacity to break food down, to digest it really well, to glean all the nutrients from that food, to give us that fuel, that quality fuel. And so it can sit around a lot in the gut, and it can make us feel quite sluggish. And it puts us at higher risk of conditions like type 2 diabetes, because we just haven't got the same capacity to manage our blood sugar levels. We haven't got the same amount of insulin to help with regulating that blood sugar. So yeah, that's been quite a revelation to me about sort of eating very late at night, and the types of food to eat at night as well. Sort of how do you expect the body's going to process a kebab at 3 o'clock in the morning with very little digestive function? And so it's kind of helped to think a bit more about sort of when you schedule meal times.
Well, that's brilliant. And that leads us nicely into what I want to go through with you in this episode, to really break that all down for someone listening, to help them understand the digestive system, the body clock, what is happening when we eat certain foods and at different times of the day. And for yourself, Anna, what impact have you seen in terms of your well-being since you've shifted how you eat and made this a habit that's part of who you are?
So this has been a huge change. I think I did shifts for a number of years, and just, I suppose, lived with a number of little niggling symptoms, but didn't never really register that it was anything to do with food choice and food timing. Like just like little things like feeling quite bloated after certain foods, feeling quite sleepy, definitely in the afternoons, feeling quite sleepy after like cheese on toast for lunch or something like that. And, it's not one rule for everybody. It's not going to be a set of fast rules to follow, but it's just learning to listen to what your body, what the symptoms are telling you, and linking that back to, okay, what have I eaten in the last 24 hours and what impact has that had? And also, I think a big change for me is monthly PMS symptoms. I used to have quite strong PMS symptoms like the week before my period came, and that's pretty much gone really. Sometimes my period will creep up now and I go, oh yes, it's the time of the month again. Whereas previously it would have been really obvious. Okay, it's that time, it's a week away, because of just how I felt. Either sometimes just quite intolerant, maybe a little bit weepy, maybe a bit, easy to just kind of fly off the handle a little bit. But all of that has gone really. The bloating in the afternoon sleepiness, and the PMS symptoms have all gone from sort of changing that eating. And I'm not doing shift pattern. I'm not working shifts now, so that obviously helps as well. But I think just a much more awareness of the food choices and food timing has really helped.
Fantastic. And so you were working shift patterns, and you were doing a job that isn't necessarily representative of the kind of work many women do, but some women do this particular job in the police force, but many women do that kind of shift work, especially in the different services we have. We mentioned health care at the start. That's such a common one, or care of any kind. There's lots of women working in, as I said, like hospitality and leisure, cleaning, caring in lots of different ways. Even if perhaps it's not as a paid employee, there's lots of women who are caring for their children in midlife and caring for elderly relatives, and that extra responsibility can mean having to get up earlier than what you typically would, doing extra chores and caring responsibilities after work. So yeah, I think there's lots of different dynamics that we can think about in terms of what can disrupt and shift our patterns. But for you, when you were in the police, Anna, like, how did you eat, when you were not just shift working, but also in a job that doesn't necessarily gift you the opportunity to have regular breaks to eat?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, and I'm still very much working in the policing environment, and not a lot has changed, if I'm honest. Unfortunately, I'm campaigning to make some changes still, but there's both ends of the spectrum. There are people that really understand about nutrition and health and the links between that, but generally those people that take meals to work with them to give themselves a fighting chance of being able to have some healthy food during a shift. But kind of if you're left to find something during your shift, well, certainly when I was there, it tended to be something very quick and easy, grabbing a bag of chips, or, always fast food, pizza if we were stuck in the police station doing files and things like that and processing prisoners. We just ordering a pizza and just didn't really think about it, to be honest. And even thinking about sort of rewarding as well. I think the budget in the police service is so limited that your shift sergeant or your boss would quite often just try and boost morale with bringing in donuts or something like that, or giving out sweets, because they can't give you a bonus for the great job you've done. So it was just something to try and, really well-meaning. But actually, if you're doing that on a regular basis, it really takes its toll.
Yeah. And actually, when I worked in corporate at Nike and was in the office, I think typically in many offices, this is the same. It's somebody's birthday, cake or donuts or cookies come in, or there's some other event. And honestly, there was often times where day after day, for so many days and weeks, there were these treats in the office. And it can become just a normal part of the culture, can't it? And I think, we use food for many emotional needs, and reward being one of those things, isn't it? Oh, we're celebrating this win as a team. Let's go and get some pizza for lunch today, or let's go to the pub for lunch. And yeah, those things are fine occasionally, but not when it's the norm. And I do think there's many workplaces that are culturally like that normally. They just have pots of sweets, plates of cookies, donuts, and so on. And yeah, I think that you touched on something that is really key to all of this, is you just don't think about it, because we haven't been educated on the consequences of eating that fast food on a regular basis, or having lots of sugary treats on a regular basis. So I kind of want to shift to what you do and why this is important. And you mentioned the term chrono-nutrition, and I've talked briefly at the start about body clocks. So yeah, share what that is then, and why that is something you're specialising in.
So chrono-nutrition is part of chronobiology. So it's looking at the rhythms of the body. And so we have this 24-hour cycle, and lots of our different hormones are governed by this 24-hour cycle. And it's pretty much under the control of the sun, really. So those really strong signals from the sunlight comes through our eyes and into our brain. So we get the message through our eyesight to the brain telling us either it's daytime, so we need energy, and this is when we're going to be at our most alert and our most focused, and so we need fuel. But then as the sun starts to set towards the end of the day, that message through to the brain is then saying, okay, that bit is done. We're now switching function into rest and repair. We don't need digestion. And so we have a rise in the hormones that are going to be more conducive to getting some sleep. So melatonin being the obvious kind of sleep hormone, that rises. And in response to that, our digestive hormones will start to decrease. So we just don't have that same functionality at night to process food.
And so why is it important to have that connection and awareness between our body clock and nutrition? Because I think most people have heard of the body clock, we think of it in relation just with sleep. And I've heard a great scientist talk about this. I can't remember his name, but he talks about how that body clock most of us know about is kind of that master controller. But we actually have body clocks throughout many, many, many cells in our bodies, as you touched on, like linked into hormones, and everything is regulated. So the gut itself has its own body clock. And, our bladder, for example, that was something that I was personally interested in because of some of the challenges that I've had with my bladder and regularity and so on. But yeah, so why nutrition with the body clock?
So I think it's there's just not much awareness that we can be driving a lot of chronic health conditions by not understanding about these rhythms, and it can, without us even knowing that that's what we're doing. So trying to process food when we do have reduced digestive function puts us at those higher risks of type 2 diabetes. It's much harder to metabolize food at night. So we're much more likely to gain weight. And then as we get towards perimenopause and menopause, that can be increasingly difficult to shift. But we any of that excess energy that we're producing by eating food at night, we've got to do something with it. So if we can't process it really well, we get around that by kind of just shunting it into fat cells to store those calories and that fuel, because we just can't burn it at the same rate as we can when we're much more active in the daytime. And so I just want the message to come out really to people that you can do so much to help yourself and your own health, and you can take control of that by making some choices, making some switches, maybe making some slight changes to habits, and just being aware of it and recognizing the impact. So just trying things and then kind of going, okay, so how did I feel? And a lot of people will go, do you know what? I didn't feel quite so sluggish. I didn't feel so bloated. I haven't had heartburn today. I'm not feeling quite so tight around the waist. My energy levels are more consistent. And that can happen really quite quickly just from making these adjustments and tweaks. But if you're in a workplace where that culture is working against you, that's when it can be really challenging. So, for example, in policing, people that would take healthy food into work might then be surrounded by the rest of the shift getting a takeaway. And it's either really difficult to be that one person sitting having your healthy stir fry or your healthy vegetable chili that you've lovingly made at home, or you ditch it and you join in with the team. And either way, it can be very frustrating and a little bit isolating and more difficult. So trying to sort of raise awareness of this to organisations that have shift workers and try and encourage them to encourage their work staff and make provisions for them to make healthy eating a bit easier is one of my key messages, a big part of my work.
And I love that. And it's so ironic, isn't it? Because the health service that is there to protect our health and help us to live long, strong lives are cited to be one of the biggest employers in the UK, the NHS, but also one of the worst employers in terms of the provision they make for staff when it comes to food and patients, which is a separate topic we'll leave on the side. But yeah, I've heard lots of different doctors on podcasts who are now advocates for health, publicly talking about their experience working in the NHS. And yeah, it's just it's ironic, isn't it, that you have these huge employers who, all employers really have or should have a commitment to want to help their staff to be healthy and well. But when you are in a sector like that, even more so, and yet it's just not being built as part of their culture and provision, is it?
Yeah, I see it as a real travesty. I think for our emergency services, our frontline workers, our nurses, we should be hugely investing in helping them be the best version of themselves when they're at work and at home, obviously. But how can we expect them to be really focused and, at their best, performing as we would expect them to in those, really responsible roles when they've maybe got a Mars bar from the tuck shop throughout the whole, from the whole night.
Yeah.
And a can of Red Bull to keep them going, or 2 or 3 cans of Red Bull to keep them going. And even a can of Red Bull sometimes so they can drive home safely after a shift, so they don't fall asleep at the wheel. But then when they get home, they can't sleep because they're buzzing with caffeine. So it's just, it's a travesty, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. And something I thought about when you were just speaking earlier there is when you were talking about the culture, how it can be hard if you're someone who does want to eat healthy and improve how they feel, but you're surrounded by people who aren't in alignment with that. I think this is common for many women at home in their family as well. That they like, I'm trying, but the kids have sweets, or the husband has to have his crisps and his beer on a night watching the TV. And so, I think there's lots of different ways that you can think about this in your own life. Is, maybe it's when you go out with a group of friends and you want to make the healthy choice and perhaps not have a drink of alcohol that evening either. But then when you're surrounded by others who are, and as we know in our culture, there's often reference to someone who chooses not to drink or chooses a healthier meal. And this is a little bit different, but I've had this happen a few times when I've done my weekly food shop, where I go through the till at Aldi, and then that there's one lady in particular, she said it a couple of times and she'll go, oh, this is a very healthy shop, isn't it? And then I have a little chat with her and I say, but do you ever say that to someone who's unhealthy shop? Well, no, because most shops are unhealthy. So it's the anomaly when you're healthy, isn't it? So yeah, I think that cultural piece and mindset is really important as well, because a big part of what I do working with my clients is get them really clear on how they want to feel and why feeling and living that way is so important to them, because we are distracted and pulled in lots of different ways. Food certainly being a huge pillar of wellness that is influenced by lots of societal and cultural kind of norms that we have in Western countries like ourselves. So yeah, I'd love to start digging into some of the tips you can provide to people who are thinking, well, God, my work shifts are all over the place, and I've heard nurses especially talk about what should be a 12-hour shift being a 14-hour shift and barely getting a chance to have a pee, let alone have a meal during that shift. Yeah. So, yeah, what are some of the tools and tips you often provide then, Anna?
That's a really good question. And I think that talking about all those different challenges is so important and so much harder if you haven't got a supportive environment around you to support you, particularly if it's a new thing that you're trying to establish. And so having some open conversations is really key, talking to your family members and sort of appealing to them to help you and maybe to come on board as well and say, okay, we're not looking to become Puritans overnight, but I just want to start making a few little tweaks that's going to really benefit everybody. Getting the kids involved in the kitchen and getting them understanding and learning about the food groups and the benefits of vegetables and things like that, is really important. And so, if you are feeling overwhelmed with where to start, then I think that some meal planning can be really helpful. And it doesn't mean you've got to sit down and plan every meal for every day, every week. It's just start small and maybe just think, okay, what are the couple of days or nights next week that are always going to be those flashpoints that it's always really tricky to fit in some healthy cooking or some home cooking even, and try and think, so when can I prepare for those? When can I do a bit of cooking on my days off? And I know that, again, for shift workers, days off can be so precious. And if you come off a night shift, you may be sleeping for that first rest day and switching back onto days as well. So I know you've got all those other challenges of wanting to catch up with family members and maybe fit in a bit of exercise and all the rest of it, and sleep, obviously. But just trying to get a bit of planning in, I think, is really key. Whether it is, batch cooking up a huge big bolognese sauce with lots of veggies chopped into that as well that you can freeze into portions, or whether it's understanding some healthy snacks that can be grabbed on the go at work just to sort of keep you sustained a little bit. Just things like, like boxes of nuts. I know you can't always take those into hospitals, but depending on your work environment, a sort of trail mix type box of nuts with seeds and some dried fruit. Even things like a boiled egg, just having like a boiled egg that will give you some protein and some healthy fats and some fuel, rather than a packet of crisps if you're just grabbing something on the go, would be a healthier choice. And then just things like having, packets of oat cakes or some sort of vegetable sticks or some nut butters that you can just grab and that are going to be nourishing. And not worry. I get some women that really worry about, once you start talking about nuts and nut butter, they're like, oh, but they're so calorific. And you go, ditch the calorie thing. They're so nutrient dense. We're looking at the numbers of nutrients in food rather than the numbers of calories, which can be really quite arbitrary to sort of count. If you're looking at a great plate with lots of colourful fruit and veg on it, the number of calories in that is kind of irrelevant. It's just a nourishing plate of food that's going to give you lots of benefit. So yeah, that's perhaps a few things to start thinking about.
Yeah, it's about being prepared, isn't it? And I heard a stat recently, I can't remember the number, but it was said that at Tesco last year, the boiled egg outweighed all of the other snack options, in the meal deal, how you can have the the sandwich or salad and then a snack, that it outperformed the crisps for the first time ever, which is incredible that people are obviously starting to have that awareness and understanding around different choices. But then in the same conversation, I was listening to where they were talking about this. They were talking about the price of pre-boiled eggs, especially in somewhere like Pret, which we don't have Pret anymore in Newcastle. I don't think we're good enough for Pret up north. But, I think it can be like nearly £3 for a couple of boiled eggs. But boiling those at the start of the week, like 6 eggs, and you can get, put them in a Tupperware, or even get these nice little egg holders that you can take to work, pop in the fridge and have them there ready. So that sounds like it's a big piece of it, being prepared with those things, because in a lot of the types of jobs we're talking about when it comes to shift work, they're often the jobs that aren't ones with very nice rhythmic breaks in them and opportunities to pause and have that meal. And so that's one thing. And I liked what you said about sharing what you're doing with your community. And so when it comes to those workplaces that are, stuck in their ways, should we say, with, the nipping out to the pie and pasty shop at lunchtime and so on, what kind of things do you share with them to help begin to shift that culture?
So I would start off looking at how people are feeling, and try and then use that as a motivator in the beginning, perhaps, and then giving some of the nutrition education in hand with that, so people can relate it to their own experiences. So I give a very brief questionnaire, and I work in small groups that is 10 questions, and we rate it out of each question we rate out of 5, and then we get a score at the end. And the aim is to try and score as low as possible. And this is to gauge your health and your energy levels. And it's kind of looking at your reliance on caffeine and sugar to stimulate and give you energy. And it just looks a little bit at sort of food habits and so on. And when people look at their scores out of 50, and quite often, particularly for shift workers, the energy score is often very high, often up in the 30s. And I'll say we're aiming to get a score of 16 and below. And that they can find that quite shocking and kind of go, well, I kind of thought I was okay. But actually, I obviously am having quite a reliance on stimulants, whether it's to get out of bed in the morning, whether it's to get myself going after a meal. And so that can be quite enlightening for people. And if I then say to them, okay, if you follow a couple of these recommendations for 4 weeks, we'll redo that score chart in a month's time. And you buy into this, you choose to engage with this for 4 weeks, make some small tweaks. And it's little things like reducing your sugar in your tea and coffee, not relying so much on caffeinated and sort of energy drinks, but doing some little switches, maybe looking at what you have for breakfast, seeing how sweet and sugary that is, looking at your sleep pattern, making sure you are getting enough sleep. And then, I'll go back and we'll redo that questionnaire a month later. And it can be amazing how that score has dropped in just 4 weeks, just from me. And people don't think they've been on a diet. They don't think it's necessarily been very punishing. Often I've been quite surprised how easy it was, especially if they're doing it together as a group at work. And I say to them, set up a WhatsApp group and encourage each other and talk about your little wins and your recipes you've tried, or if the fact that you've found it really hard today, has anyone got any advice? Sort of engage with each other and have that peer support, maybe a little bit of competitiveness. And that can be a lovely way to introduce these ideas into a company that has been stuck in their ways for a long time. And once people have done that 4 weeks and have engaged with things, they're kind of like, okay, we need more. We need to carry this on now. This feels really good. I'm actually losing a bit of weight, and I hadn't even really, that wasn't really even really the whole purpose. It was more to do with energy. But actually a common side effect of that will be weight loss too, if it's needed. And so then trying to then get the sort of management on board with what's going on and reporting back, you can then say to them, you could have a workforce that feels well, that is energized, that maybe might impact your sickness record. It might impact your retention because the staff are starting to feel valued by this kind of support. But tread very carefully and very slowly, because you don't want to upset people and look like you're being judgmental at all as well. So it's quite delicate.
I can imagine. Yeah, and so a couple of things have come out from that. One I especially love, and it's one of the tips that I use in my habits framework to help people build new habits, is creating that environment. And, we know how important it is to be part of a community, a tribe, so to speak, that support you living the way you want to live. It's like a smoker. If someone wants to give up smoking, then going out every day on the fag breaks with the people that would usually probably isn't going to help them quit smoking any easier or sooner.
Absolutely.
And likewise, for many, many habits, we are as humans pulled and drawn by the environment we're in. So that's great. And I love that idea of the WhatsApp group and supporting each other and encouraging. I'm sure there's lots of ways we can gamify that, because we know our brains, especially in the world today, we like those things that hook us in and engage us and make it maybe slightly competitive as well from a fun perspective. Yeah. And then the other thing you'd said, Anna, kind of leaned into, is how impactful it is when you begin to make any kind of change and you feel those positive effects and you get the ripple effect. That's the power, isn't it? Is, you do something like maybe shifting up your snacks to try to improve your energy, but then you also unexpectedly maybe start sleeping better because your energy's better, your mood's slightly better, perhaps not arguing as much with your partner, maybe you're a bit more organised at work, whatever it could be, it ripples out. And I've done a podcast episode on my own a long time ago on the back of some people in a corporate team I was working with, where I delivered a session who were really interested and said, yeah, but is it not just such hard work to keep being healthy, to have to do all that stuff? And I'd never really thought about it until they'd asked in the way they did. And I was like, well, no, because it's like the downward spiral happens so easily, but the upward spiral doesn't. So you get those amazing ripple effects that mean you go, actually, maybe I would like to bring lunch in because I'm feeling good just by having less Red Bull or chocolate on the afternoon. And so that's so powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think if people see it more as a new lifestyle rather than a short-term diet, because we know that short-term diets just don't work. And so, and also you've got to think about, once that initial motivation starts to wane, how do you keep that going as well? And so I just think sort of checking in with symptoms and how you feel. And that's why I like to go back 4 weeks later to check with people, because they don't realise that, and they sort of look back at their original score and say, do you remember that, when you said, do you ever wake up feeling refreshed? And to that you said, no, never. And so that was a really high score for that. And they were like, oh yeah. And so you don't realise like how far you've come in that period of time. So it's really helpful to just check in with that. And so making those changes, as you've referred to a lot with behaviour change, just doing it really gradually. So you don't expect too much overnight, but just introducing things really gradually so they become those new habits. And, sort of sudden, after a few weeks, you realise that you don't need your mid-morning snack with your coffee because you've had such a lovely, gorgeous, nourishing breakfast that you're feeling full and well into lunchtime. So that's gone. That's not coming back because that breakfast is now established. You're not going to be having your bowl of Frosties anymore. Or if it's non-negotiable, maybe you do have them, but only once a week now, and that's your occasional treat. But the rest of the time, you're making those better choices for yourself. And if that can then also ripple into your family, particularly if you've got kids, and you can see the impact on them, and you see them flourishing on nourishing food as well. That can make your heart sing, that you've spent the time in the kitchen, you've managed to hide all the vegetables so they don't pick them all out. And or you pureed it all or whatever it is into the pasta sauce, and you see the difference in their energy and their behaviour maybe too. And then you kind of think, we're not going back.
Yeah, exactly. So thinking about midlife women who are navigating perimenopause and then into menopause, this is something which is especially important because of the hormonal imbalances we are experiencing through this life season and the big role that food plays, which I know a lot of women automatically just think of food in terms of their weight, but we know food does so much. We've mentioned energy a lot, what it's doing to our gut and that diverse microbiome we have in our gut, or ideally the diverse microbiome we have, and what that does to everything in terms of how we function. Like, what are some of the challenges and things, speaking to my listener who's typically that midlife woman, what she should be thinking about to improve her diet so that she can support those symptoms she might be struggling with?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm sure you've covered this in previous podcasts, but it is quite cruel for women in this life phase that not only does our metabolism slow down, so we don't burn fuel as efficiently as we previously did with that hormonal shift, but also the relationship between estrogen, progesterone, and insulin is really interesting as well. It's very complex, and insulin being that hormone that helps us to regulate our blood sugar. And so every time if we eat a food that spikes the blood sugar, we're demanding production of insulin to help manage that and bring it back down again. But also, cruelly, the relationship with estrogen, progesterone and insulin means that our insulin production is also less effective as we come into menopause, until we sort of recalibrate and we rework out how to manage this process without those hormones. But that's why perimenopause can take so long, because there's so much recalibrating to do through the brain. And so if you're then a shift working perimenopausal woman and your insulin production doesn't work at night so well because it's having a rest, and also you haven't got that optimal function because you're perimenopausal, so you're losing estrogen, or your estrogen and progesterone are sort of fluctuating and so on. So some women can then end up almost being totally frightened to eat anything. And I know some women that say, well, I'm only eating one meal a day and I'm still gaining weight. And so there's that internal battle about what can I eat and when can I and how can I eat. So I would just say, just think about the food timing. So trying to eat the majority, like the sort of the main meal of the day, certainly when it's daylight if possible. If you're having to eat later into the evening or the night when it's getting darker, try little and often and very much more plant-based. So it's not really heavy to digest, but little bits that will just boost your fuel, boost your energy levels to keep you going, but not demanding that your gut can digest a massive meal when it's like suboptimal function. But also really thinking about the stress levels, that sort of underlying level of cortisol, the stress hormone that can just keep that kind of, we call it low-grade chronic stress, where it's just always there, ebbing away in the background, can be an inhibitor to fat burning. So really thinking about what kind of exercise you're doing. Are you overstressing the body? Is there a lot of cortisol going on in the body? Or do you need something at the moment slightly more restorative, a little bit more gentle? Getting out in nature for a really good walk can be, equally as beneficial as doing a big session in the gym sometimes. Some yoga, some Pilates, something that's not going to be putting more stress on the body, so that we can sort of manage those cortisol levels, that doesn't then prevent the fat burning side of things too. Because, training to within an inch of your life where you've just got cortisol pumping around the whole time can have that sort of adverse effect of actually it's not burning any fat because it's an inhibitor. So there's that sort of consideration too.
Yeah, it's so tough. And obviously this is what I do in my programs and work with women. And it's why I have those 5 pillars of wellness. If you're a regular listener, I'm sure you've heard me talk about these and how connected our health is. So you've mentioned different forms of movement there, Anna. Yet I know your lifestyle, but your specialty is nutrition. My pillars are mindset, movement, nutrition, sleep, and stress. And we've touched on all of those 5 things because they are so integrated. And this is the missing piece that most women don't know about because we haven't been taught it. And so they go only to the food. they calorie count, they restrict, they limit, but actually they're not feeling any better. And probably, their reason for doing that is weight loss, and that's not happening often. It's the exact opposite. And so they just feel completely stuck. So it is very much coming at it from this 360-degree lifestyle. And one of the things you've mentioned is the work you do with corporate teams, and that initial assessment of how they feel is very much around energy. It's not about weight. It's how you feel and how you want to feel, isn't it? And that's the connection that matters to many people, which gets them spurred up and geared, into action, so that they can begin to make some of these small changes and so on. Exactly. So yeah, I love that. There's one thing that you've touched on a few times, which I just wanted to ask your opinion on, because I know this is really hard when we think about our body clock and that natural rhythm we're meant to have as humans around daylight and darkness. In the UK, we have darkness for a lot of the months of the year, or what feels like a lot anyway. So, thankfully, when we're recording this, the evenings are, on those light evenings anyway, are on the horizon. The sun is setting later, and I can certainly feel just that lightness, inside of me because of that. But yeah, when we have those months where, it's dark at 3:34, even 5, and most people aren't getting home from work until way after that. And then they've got to prepare that evening meal to have together. So, I have a very good pattern of when I eat, but for many of those autumn winter months, I am eating in the dark. So should we be worrying about that, or is that something that is okay because of where we live in the Northern Hemisphere?
I think we definitely don't want to be adding further stress and worry to people and people getting obsessed about it. But I think if you think more towards the end, like sort of that evening grazing and snacking, so maybe you're sitting down to watch a movie and you've got your big bowl of popcorn or whatever it might be, it's that kind of food that later on into the evening that we're not going to break that down and process that very well. So it's kind of just thinking about those habits. Are they occasional habits, or is that something that happens every evening? Is it like after dinner, is it right, let's get the pudding and the chocolates out in front of the telly? So it's those kinds of habits that are more of a concern, that they're going to be the more high sugar foods, the more processed foods. Ideally, we would probably have the bulk of our calories earlier in the day, if we can do, before it gets dark. But that's just not practical, as you've said, in the Northern Hemisphere. But thinking about sort of with the meal planning again, I suppose, if you're going to have a very kind of meat-heavy, richer meal, can that be slightly earlier in the day, rather than having that at sort of 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the evening, where it's just going to take that, it's going to be harder to process it and break it down. So just giving yourselves that bit more opportunity to, if you've gone to all that trouble to prepare that food, let's try and have it at a time of day when you're going to be able to absorb all those fantastic nutrients to help you. Again, it can depend a little bit on your own individual body clock. So if you're a bit of more of a morning person, you might be happier having your evening meal a bit earlier, or you might be happy to have your main meal in the middle of the day sometimes, and then have more of a tea, a sort of lighter tea in the evening. If you're more of an evening person, which I am, we do tend to have more of our calories towards the end of the day. But you just need to be a little bit more aware of that and think about the content of those, and then what you're expecting your digestive system to process. So I would say don't get obsessed about it, but just be aware of it, and where you can, just make some small adjustments where possible. But sort of the later evening snacking is probably more of a problem than the main evening meal.
Yeah, totally. And I'm in alignment with what you've said there, and work with my clients. And I have a set of kind of 13 values around nutrition and food. And it's not about ticking them all off, or certainly not right away, but gradually making those smaller changes. So I loved what you said about forward thinking to your week and what's going on. And for example, Wednesdays, I always have coaching calls on a Wednesday, and every other week that call doesn't finish until 7 p.m. Now, my daughter loves to have her tea. We call the evening dinner tea. It's 6:30. She's very regular. Her body clock's like, I have to eat then. And so most Wednesdays I use the slow cooker, and she's also she has celiac disease, so eats gluten free and is a veggie. And so I have to bring all of those things together and think, okay, what can I do in the slow cooker? And try and do something in that so that we have something there that is ready for her to eat earlier, ready for me when I come off the call and so on. And also, easy to prepare. So we're actually recording this on a Wednesday, so I've got the slow cooker out ready to quickly chop up some veg, and I'm actually using Orzo. I've had it, but the gluten-free Orzo's only just come into Tesco a few weeks ago or a couple of months ago, actually, for the first time. So I'm going to do that now. I prefer not to have a carb-heavy meal on an evening, especially when it is later. But as you said, sometimes it has to, it's the whole family dynamic, linking with work, her requirements, and so on. So sometimes you can't tick every box you'd like to tick, but that's, I think, a big part of, certainly for me, the work I do with clients is that whole self-awareness and some support and compassion as well, to go, okay, well, I would love to do all of that. And I'd love to sit down to a lovely meal of maybe some nice fish and veggies. But when I don't finish work until 7 and I've got a child to feed before, that's just how it is. And so we can't necessarily be perfect if perfect even exists, I think is the point.
Exactly right. No, exactly right. And I'm doing a late shift tonight as well. So I'm over at Heathrow later working with some bus drivers over at Heathrow. And so I've got a leftover portion of some sweet and sour chicken that I made on Monday. So I've got a little portion to take with me. And I'm just cooking some rice while we've been chatting. So to pop that in my bag and take with me as well. So it's just thinking ahead a little bit. And it just gives you that fighting chance of having easy accessibility to some healthy food without it feeling like a really onerous task at just the wrong time.
Yeah. And so it can feel out of reach for some people if you aren't a cook, someone who enjoys cooking, someone who struggles with the preparation and organising. The thought of the weekly shop is in itself enough to just, send you into hiding with a packet of crisps or a bar of chocolate. So I love to wrap up, Anna, with ways people can actually take what they've heard today and take some action to create a habit themselves to eat better, whether that's for someone who does have irregular working patterns and needs more regularity and habits around that, or just in general for someone who wants to improve their diet. What would be 3 steps you would kind of summarise what you've shared that someone can take to begin building those better, healthier habits?
So I think on top of the meal planning, there's a lovely little book. It's quite old now. It came out in 2009 initially by an author called Michael Pollan, and it's called Food Rules. It's a tiny little, really thin little pocketbook. And he thought that the whole nutrition science industry recommendations was just getting way too complicated. And so he's broken it down into 7 words with 3 little steps. So first of all, eat food. And by that, he means real food, not edible like food, like edible like substances, which we get falling out of a packet and onto a plate, and we ping it, and we look at the ingredients and would not have most of those ingredients in our home kitchen. So that's the first thing. Eat real food, but eat food is his first tip. Mostly plants. So understanding that there are benefits from being a meat eater. I eat meat sort of a few times a week, and my health really benefits from that. Other people really, flourish on a vegan or vegetarian diet. So he's looking there at the benefits of a diverse range of plant-based foods in the diet. And again, trying to keep that whole foods rather than, like, again, ultra-processed, like your fake chickens and your fake this and your fake that, but trying to keep it real. So eat food, mostly plants, not too much. So it's about registering your portion sizes, meeting the needs of what your activity levels are and what you need for that day, checking in maybe 2/3 of the way through your meal to think, am I still really hungry? Have I had enough? do I need all of this? Can some of it be parked for lunch tomorrow? Do I need seconds? Do I need, and just because the lasagna dish is on the table and there's a little bit left, do we need it? Can that be parked and saved for tomorrow? So just registering what your individual needs are. So eat food, mostly plants, not too much.
Fantastic tips. And you've given so many tips throughout. I loved what you shared earlier about those small changes, especially regarding snacking. I know for many women who I've worked with and had on my retreat days, snacking is a massive thing that, when I talk to them about at least having that 12-hour window of not eating to allow your digestive system to rest and repair and recover overnight, they kind of raise and go, what? So I can't have a packet of crisps and a glass of wine at like 10 o'clock at night. And so those tips, I think, are really valuable ones as well. There's some great shifts there that you can, planning ahead to have those little bags of nuts or seeds or fruit and all different things, the eggs we mentioned. So yeah, lots of things for you to just maybe pause on now and go, okay, what has Anna said that I could actually start with? And you nicely put this in the same way that I do as well. It's small steps. So what's one small step that you could take? Maybe it's eating more plants because you realise that actually, although you have maybe decent protein in terms of chicken and perhaps some fish, salmon or something during the week, perhaps you're accompanying that with things out of packets and, blended with lots of processed types of ingredients that can, certainly for hormonal balance, can actually be very detrimental. So yeah, lots of brilliant tips. So if you want to find out more from Anna, I'll pop everything into the show notes, but where's the best place for someone to connect with you? And what I'm going to say is if your workplace needs Anna, then, definitely reach out.
Yeah, please. Yeah, so I do have a website, Nutrivival, and I'm regularly on Instagram and LinkedIn. So you'll definitely find me on there. I do a little bit on Facebook, but yeah, you'll be able to find me on those 3 platforms mainly.
Fantastic. And I think the work you're doing with companies is so important because we spend such a huge proportion of our lives in work. That is a big part of how we are, isn't it? So if we can be supported in our workplaces to eat better and feel better, then we are going to bring those habits into our lives. And the thing that I'm ultimately about, that you mentioned, is helping our kids to have healthier habits. So, we can model those back at home and create shift in our families for them to grow up healthier. So that's ultimately what it's all about, isn't it? We want our kids to live longer, healthier lives. Yeah.
And it's not, we're not judging at all. It's just we're surrounded by unhealthy food products that just become habits, and we just don't really think about it. We reach for stuff off the supermarkets and without thinking twice, and we're giving that to our kids. But when we really stop to think about it and look at the ingredients, we kind of think, why would I give my most precious little person on the planet that? But it's so easy to grab those things, and it's hard to make things from scratch all the time. But it's only by doing that we're going to really feel at our best, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, the environment around us, which we said is important to have a change, is one that is throwing food at us all different ways, and most of the food, especially if you want to snack, that is accessible, isn't very healthy. And I've experienced this. My daughter's had her diagnosis of celiac disease for I think about 11 or 12 years now. So I've been living with this in our family for quite some time, of having to look at ingredients and having to think about what she eats. And, we know when we go to certain places, especially when she was younger, anything really geared up for kids, amusement parks, theme parks, like soft play, parties, the food is always the most unhealthy, ultra-processed food. Now, she couldn't have that because most of that food contains gluten. But that really made me think from a very, very young age with her of, actually, God, everything that's geared up to give to kids, even for the main meal, if you're out on a day trip somewhere, is pretty rubbish and unhealthy and actually making them hyper and other things. So I think generally we don't think about that because we're marketed to as though it's, this is the type of thing kids eat. But actually, when you have to look at it, you realise that it isn't very healthy. And I realised when she was diagnosed and the NHS, sit you down with a nutritionist and you get a lot of education and actually scaremongering around what she has to change in her diet. I thought this is going to be horrendous. It's going to be so tough. But then I realised quite quickly it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be, certainly to manage at home, because most of what we ate were made from whole foods. It was those things that you typically do give kids, the beige food, the frozen food, the snacks, that you think, well, actually, that's the stuff that contains gluten and is really unhealthy anyway. Why am I even giving my child that? So that's something to think about as well. But I've loved the conversation. There's so much more I could ask and talk about, but we'll wrap it up there, and I'll share all of the different ways to connect with Anna in the notes. So thank you so much, Anna.
Thanks, Nicola. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.